Tropical Storm Bertha is spinning in the Gulf Coast and is expected to make landfall later today. Louisiana and Texas, you are next in line for potential tropical storm impacts as the storm moves westward. However, as far as tropical storm impacts go, this one will be very unusual and very weak. So today we'll be tracking that. We'll also be tracking some other flooding concerns across the US. In particular, across Virginia and North Carolina, there's a pretty significant flood threat the next few days. The weather pattern is shifting. The heat wave will also be strengthening next week, and we'll also be taking a look at that. Today is Wednesday, July 22nd, and today in the weather world will catch you up to speed for all that's happening with Bertha and all the other weather across the country over the next few days. Okay, let's get started with tracking Bertha. So here's a look at Tropical Storm Bertha on satellite, and I'm gonna say this storm is really struggling. Its low-level center is actually somewhere just to the south of Mississippi, nearing Louisiana, but notice where all the thunderstorms are. They're all over the open waters of the Gulf. They're really far away and displaced from the center of the storm. This is thanks to strong, persistently northerly winds up higher in the atmosphere, tilting the storm and blowing all of the thunderstorms further south. So obviously this is pretty bad in terms of structure for the storm. We're likely seeing some weakening soon. It is good for land though. These northerly winds are keeping most of the heavy rain off the shore, meaning Louisiana, even though the center of the tropical storm will make landfall somewhere to the south of New Orleans later today, we really aren't expecting that many impacts. Look at this. This is where the center of our storm is. It's really only about 50 or 60 miles away from land, but look at the radar. We have very little in the way of rain, so that's just to a testament how all the rain is being pushed off the coast. Now the cone of this storm does take it further to the west, so it's going to track across the south of Louisiana. It does look likely it'll make landfall in some form in Texas as well later. I do think this official cone is a little bit on the north side of the guidance. Many of the models are indicating a little bit further south. Either way though, this is not going to be a big deal. It's likely already peaked intensity. It's just going to be weakening here on out as it moves westward, with a combination of that strong northerly winds helping to rip it apart as well as moving over land. So let's check this out on radar. What impacts do we expect? Well, there is definitely some coastal flooding that's happening across portions of the Gulf Coast states, especially after the storm passes. The winds will be moving onshore. So some of these gusty winds moving on the shore, it can bring about 1 to 2, maybe 3 feet of some coastal flooding. Nothing significant, but definitely noticeable. A good idea to stay out of the beaches until the storm passes. Also, some gusty winds are possible across southern Louisiana and portions of the Gulf states closer to the center. These will not be damaging or significant by any means. It's just going to be a nuisance. So some locally gusty conditions possible. Other than that, in terms of rainfall, it's going to be pretty isolated. Now, the areas that do see some of these heavier rain bands move onshore, we could definitely get some briefly torrential rain and some isolated flash flooding. It is still a tropical system. It's just most of the concentrated heavy rain is going to stay over the waters, and Louisiana, many spots will miss out on rain entirely along the coast. So all in all, this is a pretty low end event. Texas, I do think you have slightly higher chances of seeing some of that heavier rain. So now waking up on Thursday morning, we have our system just offshore. By this point in the forecast, the storm may have dissipated. It may no longer be a tropical storm at this point. Either way though, the remnant energy and rain will still move into Texas, and it could bring some tropical downpours wherever it does track. So an inflow of moisture and some rain is possible. It looks like from Corpus Christi a little bit further to the west. San Antonio, you'll kind of be on that border, but you might get a few scattered showers, but this will quickly move westward. It's going to be a one-day deal Thursday into early Friday morning. Maybe also bringing some briefly gusty winds across Texas. Other than that, just a little bit of rain, maybe isolated flooding, and then Bertha's out of our hair. So a very weak tropical system moving westward with not too much fanfare about it. These are your maximum wind gusts. So across portions of the coast of Louisiana, again, just some breezy conditions possible, briefly gusty. You might notice the winds, but it's not going to be any more of a big deal than that. And then some of these gusty winds moves across Texas as we go Thursday into Friday. Still nothing too damaging or noteworthy, and then it's all gone as the storm dissipates. So that was Bertha. We do have some other weather stories to talk about that are actually much more impactful, believe it or not, than the tropical storm that's actually happening. So let's turn now to portions of the mid-Atlantic. In the Carolinas and Virginia, we have a stalled cold front here, and this is going to be the focus for some very heavy rain over the next few days. So what I want you to pay attention to is notice how the storms are moving from west to east over the same areas over and over again. So if I kind of circle this region, if I just go through this model from morning into the afternoon, we just have these repeated rounds of rain training over the same areas again and again. This is because we have that cold front focusing rain, and it's going to be moving so slowly to the south. This slow motion is really what's going to help set up a heavy rain threat. So I'll show you the outlook in a minute, but from Tennessee to North Carolina and Virginia, Virginia. That's where we're pretty concerned about a elevated flash flood risk with just a lot of training of heavy rain. Now there could also be a few stronger storms in the mix. That's most likely a little bit further to the east, so eastern Virginia. This is where we have a slightly better instability. Some gusty winds and maybe even an isolated tornado can't be ruled out. It's not too big of a deal though. Tomorrow the threat for heavy rain shifts a little bit further south, but it still lingers. So Virginia clears out tomorrow, but now all of North Carolina into northern South Carolina, and we're still tracking portions of Tennessee. Again, we still have these storms just moving from west to east, training over the same areas again and again. It's going to be a very soggy day, but by the end of the day, especially with all this rain adding up, flash flooding becomes another concern. So that's an area we're watching out very closely today and tomorrow. We're going to see a lot more rainfall here than we are along the Gulf Coast from the tropical storm, which is very ironic. Now the other area that we're going to be watching is a little bit further to the west. Our monsoon has been pretty active across the southwest and the western US. We've had a lot of moisture streaming in from the Pacific. Today's going to be a very wet day with these scattered downpours from Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, so just all across the mountains. We could definitely see some flooding given the terrain here in some of the valleys with some of this heavy rain. Overnight into tonight and waking up Thursday morning, the rain will shift further to the east, so we're talking into the plains, maybe a little bit more concentrated rain across Kansas to start your Thursday morning. Very little severe risk here, maybe some brief gusty winds at most, but we aren't really expecting severe weather, but just some more decent rain concerns. Notice we have another cluster of storms and showers moving off the Rockies into the plains as we go into Thursday evening, and then this will continue tracking to the east into early Friday morning. Some wet rainmakers maybe disrupt a few outdoor plans. Flash flooding is the biggest threat, otherwise some beneficial rain, especially in the summertime, will take a bit of an edge off the heat. So severe weather today, it hugs the east coast along that stalled cold front I talked about. Also extends a little bit further north into Maine, and then further to the west we have two pockets. We have a small pocket with that monsoon in northeast Colorado. We even have a small pocket of severe weather in Oregon. That's pretty rare, but just very isolated in nature. Tomorrow, currently no severe weather risks, so that's great news. So it is summer. It's definitely possible somewhere we see storms tomorrow, briefly gusty winds. We can never really rule that out in the summertime, but no real organized signals for severe weather. And even as we go into Friday, only a marginal severe weather risk across the far northern US. Otherwise, the rest of us are looking pretty good. So a bit of a quieter stretch of severe weather the next few days, which we'll definitely take as good news. The flood risk will be much more impactful though. First off, with all that moisture from the monsoon, a pretty decent risk for flash flooding, especially in this yellow shade out here over the mountains. The terrain is very sensitive where it's easy to see some flooding. The area of greater concern though, in my opinion, is along that stalled cold front. We do have a moderate, a level 3 out of 4 risk across portions of Virginia and North Carolina. That is pretty significant. Tomorrow, the moderate risk shifts a little bit further south over North Carolina with a broader slight risk still along that stalled cold front. So in these areas, we want to be a little more aware for some possible flooding concerns. Otherwise, across Texas, this is a little risk from Tropical Storm Bertha moving in. We probably will get an upgrade to a slight risk somewhere here. So some isolated flooding for sure, but nothing terribly significant. Again, a bit more of a bullseye over the plains with some of that energy from the west moving eastward. So that's the weather pattern over the next few days. Flash flooding is really the biggest concern. Let's go a little bit further in the extended forecast to track what's upcoming for us. And it's really going to be the strengthening of high pressure over much of the southern US. So our summer heat dome is really taking charge. It's going to be centered over the southern plains. So from Texas into portions of the plains in the Four Corners, you can really see this big clockwise flow very clearly here in the wind stream. This is the signature of high pressure. So if you're in the high pressure ridge, it's going to be hot and it's going to be dry. We have sinking air, compressing air that heats things up. On the periphery of the high pressure though, especially the northern US, this is where our jet stream is going to be, and this is where the active weather is. So all of our storm systems, our low pressures are going to ride around that ridge of high pressure, and it's going to keep a pretty active weather pattern in the north. Meanwhile, the south is just going to stay hot and dry. So here's what I'm talking about as we get through the next few days. We're going to have that front and that system clearing off the east coast by the end of the week. Going into the weekend though, we're going to be largely dry over much of the southern US. So we have our rain dome, our rain shield. Meanwhile, in the northern US, you can kind of see these storms moving up the Four Corners into the northern plains and then eastward through portions of the northeast. This is what the storm track is going to favor the next few days. Now, there definitely is additional opportunities for severe weather when this happens, especially wind. Wind is a pretty common concern around this time of year, where damaging winds, maybe even a few derechos, that wouldn't be too uncommon with some of these complexes, again favoring the northern and northeastern US. Too far away for any specifics, but starting this weekend into next week, this is going to be the new weather pattern. So in my next video, we'll definitely focus more on severe weather concerns a little bit further to the north. Meanwhile, the heat will boil on in the south. Case in point, let's track out those temperatures. We have a major heat risk in this red shade in the south later today, and notice every day as I go tomorrow, Friday, it's just going to continue moderate to major in the orange and red in the south, even some extreme purple. That's the highest category of heat risk. The other thing to pay attention to is portions of the northern plains will be joining in on the heat later this week. The heat wave will really expand to areas further north. If you're in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, we did have a heat wave earlier this summer. It's looking like we'll have another strong one later on this weekend into next week. Look at Sunday, how many of us are in this red, major heat risk across the US, with that continuing to expand as we go Monday and even Tuesday of next week. It is summer, it's supposed to be hot. This will be unusually hot though, and definitely dangerous if we're not taking it seriously. So watch the red and the dark red on the map. This is where the hottest temperatures set up. Over the next few days, it'll be especially over Texas, but then that heat will expand to the north as we were talking about, and we could easily be talking triple digits up in Montana, up in the Dakotas again, this far north. Very unusual, but unfortunately it's just what's in the cards and very dangerous for us with some of these hot temperatures. And that's all in the world of weather over the next few days. So we're in a bit of a quieter stretch, which is definitely good. We're still watching out for some flooding concerns, especially in Virginia and North Carolina, and then we still have Bertha moving into Texas, could bring some briefly heavy rain. As I mentioned though, with that shift in the pattern, I do think severe weather will come back pretty big time across the northern, the Midwest, and northeastern US as we go into next week. So that'll definitely be the next focus, and I'll make a video on that as we get closer. If you don't want to miss that update and any other updates in the weather world, consider subscribing. Otherwise, stay safe out there, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.